Dear colleagues, colleagues based in Bangkok, good afternoon. Colleagues in other parts of the Asia Pacific region, good evening in some cases, good morning in some cases. In my own case here, I'm coming to you from Brussels in Belgium, so it's very definitely good morning from here. My name is Niall McCann. I am the policy and the legal policy advisor and project manager for legal identity for the United Nations Development Programme. UNDP is currently co-chair along with our colleagues in UNICEF and in the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs of the United Nations Legal Identity Agenda Task Force. This is a task force that was established by the UN Deputy Secretary General in late 2018 in order to coordinate the United Nations approach to legal identity, both at the policy level and also at the programming level. The task force includes a total of 13 United Nations agencies, funds, programs, and departments that are all somehow involved in the issue of legal identity. So this includes colleagues from agencies such as the United Nations Refugee Agency, the World Food Programme, the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, International Organization for Migration, UNFPA, UN Women, and others. What ultimately are we trying to do? We are trying to assist member states to achieve, as per SDG target 16.9, legal identity for all, including birth registration by 2030. And to be absolutely clear, what do we mean by legal identity? Well, both the United Nations Statistical Commission and also the United Nations Economic and Social Council, which has the mandate for approving standards in this area, approved the working definition of legal identity in late 2019, which defines legal identity as the basic characteristics of a person's individual identity, for example, name, sex, place, and date of birth, conferred through registration and the issuance of a certificate by an authorized civil registration authority, and the issuance following the occurrence of birth. In the absence of birth registration, legal identity may be conferred by a legally recognized identification authority. This system should be linked to the civil registration system to ensure a holistic approach to legal identity from birth to death. So there we have it. Quite clearly, therefore, for this warm-up session, for this ministerial conference, the United Nations sees civil registration as an integral part of legal identity. Now, we are very cognizant of the fact that for hundreds of millions of people in the world, they may either never have had their birth registered, or their birth was registered, but they never received a birth certificate, or years later, as they go through life, they may either have lost their birth certificate, there may be no record of their birth ever having been registered in state civil registers, or both the documents themselves or the databases, etc., could have been destroyed due to natural disasters, conflict, etc. So we are very cognizant that in the absence of birth registration, many UN member states have also introduced various forms of schemes to try to combat that fact. Some countries have issued, largely for adults, but not exclusively for adults, various forms of national ID registers, national population registers, have issued people with national ID numbers. And of course, these schemes are not just because somebody might have lost a birth certificate. They are an integral part of how many UN member states manage their population's identity and ensure that everybody resident in a country's territory has some form of legal identity with which to move through life. We do believe in the UN, as the definition said. We do believe that the systems for civil registration, primarily the birth and death registration system, should be closely linked to any national population registers, any national ID card schemes, for a number of basic facts. First of all is that if you do not have a linkage between the civil registration system and a national identity register or a national population register, then it might be quite difficult confirming the identity of a teenager that enters into a national identity register or a national ID card scheme when that person hits the age of 14 or 16 or 18 or whatever age it is that the member state decides to roll out that scheme at. We also believe it's very, very important that national identity registers, national ID card schemes, etc., be very closely linked to the death registration system. If not, then you can have a situation where, as every single day goes by, a national identity register or a national ID card register includes more and more dead people, after which it is extremely difficult to remove those dead people from the database, and this opens up greater possibilities then, unfortunately, for identity theft and identity fraud, where people are using the identities of dead people in order to access various public and private services. So these are some of the reasons why we believe it's incredibly important that civil registration systems and various forms of identity management schemes, such as national population registers, etc., be closely linked. That's basically enough for my introduction. As this is a warm-up session, we're basically going to just hear now from one or two, in fact, excellent speakers on various different aspects of civil registration and the links with legal identity. And later on, we will, of course, be moving into the senior technical session in approximately 40 minutes from now. So today, we're going to hear from two speakers. Ms. Nikita Gurung will be joining us first, and then afterwards that, Mr. Azizbek Ashurov. Nikita, rather than me try to introduce you exactly, I'm going to let you do that yourself. And you have shared in advance some of the themes that you're going to explore with us today. And I must say it's an incredibly moving and incredibly interesting personal testimony. And it really does highlight some of the challenges that somebody can face when civil registration systems simply do not function in the manner that they are supposed to do. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will hand over now to Ms. Nikita Gurung from Nepal, who is going to introduce herself and her testimony today. Nikita, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. Namaste, my name is Nikita Gurung and I've been raised by a single mother. Today, I would like to share about my life experiences to shed some light on growing up in a patriarchal society that pervades every aspect of the Nepali society. I will mainly focus on my harrowing experience of obtaining my birth certificate to sit for SLC exams. First, let me quickly share about me, my mother, and my sister. I have an elder sister, and her name is Neha Gurung. We have experienced many things together, shared our happiness, sorrows, fought like sisters do for the same dress, and reconciled quickly. My mother used to work in the tourism sector when we were growing up. She would often plant dreams in our minds, and without knowing those dreams would merge with ours and become grand dreams. So I dreamed of traveling far and wide after growing up, and I wanted to visit interesting places around the world, fill my lungs with the air from varied regions, taste the cultures on my taste buds, serenade my soul with the colors of the world, and dive into the wisdom that every society everywhere has to offer. I also dreamt of becoming a career businesswoman and woman and traveling around the world. In a blink of an eye, I reached grade 9 and it was time to fill up the SLC form for next year. SLC means the school leaving certificate in Nepal that we give in grade 10. I was very happy and confident that I was getting closer to my dreams. After SLC, I would be a student of plus 2 and I had already planned out my roadmap. In the SLC form, I needed to mention my personal details. It was compulsorily required to mention the father's name and submit a copy of his birth registration certificate. I asked my mom about the birth registration certificate, and she simply said that we could easily apply for one. So I thought it was not a big deal, and in any case, we had a month's time to submit the form. The next day, we went to the ward office to apply for my birth registration certificate. Little did I know that this would turn into a nightmare which would haunt me through the rest of my teenage years. So when we reached the ward office the next day, we were immediately asked to present my biological father along with his citizenship certificate. We had none. My mom argued that when the one who was given birth is present, why would we need anyone else to validate it? But the officials would not budge. as they simply didn't care. They kept insisting on bringing my biological father and his citizenship certificate. He even doubted that my biological father was a Nepali man and was convinced that we did not belong to this country. We failed to get anything. So in reality, our father, who is very much a Nepali man, abandoned my mother, my sister, and after my birth. What matters most is that my mother, who is a bona fide Nepali citizen, always dreamt of conferring citizenship to us in her name through her name. But the chief district officer explained that the presence of a mother is not sufficient to issue a birth certificate. He further explained that a child's bloodline is determined through the father and not the mother. So he needed proof to determine the bloodline of my sister and I. While the discussion was going on, the deadline to submit the SLC form was getting closer and closer. Failing to submit the form would bar me from sitting for the exam, and this would limit my educational journey till grade 9 only. So now let's look into the countdown. 7 days remaining. My mom is in utter distress as she goes to visit a lawyer at Forum for Women Law and Development organization. She meets with advocate Miss Mira Dungana and explains the situation to her. 6 days remaining. We go to the court to submit our writ petition. 5 days remaining. We hurry to the court, hoping to get the stay order. However, the bench cannot proceed due to the state visit of Indian Prime Minister. 4 days remaining. The state visit is still on, and the streets are sparkling clean and well decorated. Meanwhile, my mom and I sit on the bench inside the garden of the Supreme Court, looking outside. 3 days remaining. We watched Prime Minister Modi deliver a live speech on television as we wait in the court premises. Prime Minister Modi points out that the close relationship between Nepal and India, and how the two nations are wonderful examples of brotherly love. The irony of this remark could not escape my mom, and she quipped sarcastically, "This close proximity between Nepal and India is what scares the government and often makes them view Nepali children as offspring of the neighboring country who needs to be punished." So 2 days remaining, the day ends with us pacing back and forth in the waiting area of the Supreme Court. So 1 day remaining. It is the last day for submission. My mother is visibly distressed. I am pale with the thought that I had lost the war even before it started. So good news is that Prime Minister Modi's visit has ended, and that the Supreme Court is only and the Supreme Court is benches will resume. Our case number is second, and there is only one hearing before us. Both of us were glued to our seat. To our horror, the ongoing case looked like it would take up the entire day. Our eyes were fixed on the courtroom clock, and soon it was 4:45 p.m. At five, the court would call it a day. We were hanging into a thin thread of hope when the judge announced that it was already 15 minutes to 5 p.m. and our case would be shifted to the next day. My mom and I held hands, broke into tears, and we were overcome with sadness that cannot be described here. So we both felt everything was over as we rose from our seats with heads hung low and proceeded to leave the room. But a miracle was awaiting to happen. The judge in the high seat noticed us and queried what our case was about. Our lawyer recited the case hurriedly in one breath and informed the judge that it was the last day to submit my SLC form. Upon hearing this, the judge immediately ordered to proceed with our case, and within 15 minutes, he had issued a stay order in our favor, and in 20 minutes, it was printed and a copy was in our hands. My mom and I didn't even have the time to thank the judge, because our lawyer shoved us out of the courtroom and rushed us to the directly to the district education office to submit the stay order. I was so dazed by the flurry of events that I don't even remember when and how our lawyer hailed a cab, stuffed us into it, and instructed the driver to quickly take us to the district education office. The traffic on the road was crazy, and by the time we reached, it was already 6:30 p.m. The office was supposed to be closed by that time. However, when we exited the taxi, to our greatest surprise, not only was the office open, but the official in charge was present, and along with his assistant. Um, the office was supposed to be. I'm so sorry. So he reached out his hand and asked for the paper, the stay order. He stated in a soft voice that he had received a call from the court about our arrival. When we were amazed because we were amazed by the benevolent act of the Supreme Court judge. For us, it was nothing short of a miracle, as now I could sit for the SLC examination even without my birth certificate. So, fast forward a couple of months, and we were waiting for the verdict of our case. Though I was allowed to sit for the exams, I was always worried about the final legal outcome. All this had occurred during the promulgation of Nepal's new constitution. So our lawyer fought our case with all her might and presented proofs and precedents which eventually yielded a court decision in our favor. It was a, it was
Continue, Nikita.
okay. Sorry. It was a huge victory, and the news was covered by national newspapers the next day. My mom repeatedly told me that the new precedent brought up by our case would provide relief to children of single mothers. After receiving the printed court orders, we proceeded happily to our ward office. We handed over the documents to the ward secretary. We were elated, but when we handed over the birth registration certificate, we were dumbfounded. And this is what the certificate looked like. If uh, So the birth registration certificate has two segments. The first half is in Nepali, and the one we see here is the English translation of the certificate. Um, so in this part, we see that when we read the English translation part, you will see that my mother's name is Miss Dipti. Mother's name has been correctly mentioned. That is Mrs. Dipti Gurung. But when it comes to my father's name, that is what the ward secretary had typed in Mr. Thegan Nabhayeko. That same name has also been written as my grandfather's name. So do you know what Mr. Thegan Nabhayeko means? For you, it will definitely look like Miss Nikita Gurung is the daughter of Mrs. Dipti Gurung and Mr. Thegan Nabhayeko. But the problem is with the literal translation of Mr. Thegan Nabhayeko in Nepali means unidentified father. So, in plain English, my father's name on my legal birth certificate issued by the government is Mr. Unidentified Father. So, there are two crucial problems with this. First, foreigners who do not understand Nepali language will quite naturally infer that the child has a father whose name is Mr. Thegan Nabhayeko. And now things become more absurd uh, because like when there are more of such certificates, foreigners may conclude that there is one man in Nepal whose name is Mr. Thegan Nabhayeko and that he has many children and wives all over Nepal. And they would also be shocked to deduce that Nepali men who are named Mr. Thegan Nabhayeko marry their daughter-in-laws too, because the grandfather's name also has been registered as Mr. Thegan Nabhayeko. The second problem is that when you say a child's father is unidentified, then it can have a negative connotations in Nepal. For instance, the mother's moral character will be immediately questioned. She will easily be viewed as a mother who is a characterless woman, someone who had sex with multiple men and is unable to identify who the father of the child is. It could also mean that the child was conceived due to gang rape that involved several men. So please tell me, who would be keen to possess such a legal certification issued by their own government? So we had no choice but to return home with the ridiculous birth certificate and start preparing our next writ petition to have it changed. Our hero advocate, our hero advocate Mira Dungana presented this certificate at the court and bombarded with questions with reference to the legal and ethical system of the entire nation. It was indeed a great embarrassment and a mockery of the existing system. The Supreme Court quickly passed a verdict to ban the use of the term Mr. Thegan Nabhayeko in all legal certificates and issued a strict order not to repeat such nonsense in the future. And thus we won again, and by this time I had changed a lot and viewed the world around me very differently. Indeed, I had gone through a challenging metamorphosis and now was ready to fly with my colorful wings. I have learned not to take anything for granted and to value gratitude more in my life. I was totally humbled by the efforts made by my mom, Dipti Gurung, and our hero, of course, advocate Mira Dungana. all the activists in this field, and also the fellow victims with whom we have walked together. I'm so happy that things have turned out all out well, but it was really tough journey that no one needs to go through. I am so happy that I had loving and dedicated people who stood by me and provided me with wings to fly. So world, here I come, a young lady destined to embrace everything that comes her way, because I am now definitely a stronger person and also more open-minded. Thank you for having me and taking the time to listen to my journey. Dhanyavad.
Nikita, I don't know what to say. Congratulations is one thing, but not just for obviously the efforts that were taken, that you and your mother fought for, but what you have done now for countless other people in the same situation. So really wonderful. Congratulations to you. This throws up, of course, an incredibly interesting issue with regards to what information should be included on a birth certificate. And I myself am new to the work area of legal identity in the last number of years, and I never really realized and asked myself, I was always a privileged enough person to always have been in a situation where some of these issues were easier for where I came from and because of my own family circumstances. But one thing that has become evidently clear to not just to myself, but I think to the wider United Nations family over the last number of years. No woman should be prevented from registering a child's birth or for receiving a certificate documenting that woman's child's birth dependent on the actions of any other relative, whether that's a father, whether that's a husband, whether that's any other form of head of household, etc. And no child should be prevented from receiving a birth certificate without the names or the additions or the presence of any other person other than the mother of that child that's registering the child's birth. And as we are all aware, I think, the United Nations will continue to advocate and to push for the issuance of birth certificates and the registration of every child's birth on the planet. But there are, in fact, no widely agreed UN standards as to what information exactly should go on a birth certificate. Some countries do include names of fathers, some countries only include names of mothers, some countries include names of parents, and this is a word usage that is becoming more common as the years go by. But to reiterate again, no child should be prevented from having their birth registered and a certificate issued dependent on the presence or the naming of any other person other than the mother on that certificate. Nikita, thank you so much. We are now going to move across to Kyrgyzstan, to our dear colleague, Mr. Azizbek Ashurov. Azizbek, again, I am not going to introduce you exactly. I will allow you to do so yourself. And welcome, the floor is yours to discuss a little bit about the relationship between civil registration and legal identity in the Central Asian context. Azizbek, go ahead. You're on mute.
Apologize. Thank you, Mr. Makan, for very clear introduction, and of course to Nikita for your story, emotional journey, which I really happy for you that finally this journey was finished with the favor of you. But unfortunately, millions of people in this kind of situation around the world still waiting the resolution of this kind of cases today. That's why, dear ladies and gentlemen, I'd like today to share with you the short presentation about the situation with the civil registration and legal identity issues in our region in Central Asian context. First of all, I'd like to shortly introduce myself. My name is Azizbek Ashurov. I'm head of Fergana Valley Lawyers Without Borders. It's a civil organization which is host for a Central Asian network on statelessness, which includes 11 organizations from 5 countries of Central Asia. Central Asian Network is a network that collectively work towards direct dialogue for the exchange of information and experience in order to prevent and reduce statelessness, as well as working towards the development of institution of citizenship in the region. Network has two major missions goals. First of all, network support the governments to improve its national institutes of citizenship and civil documentation and protection system against statelessness. And second goal is seek pathway towards solution of real cases of stateless people or people with unregulated legal status. Uh, as we all know that the international legal definition of stateless person is a person who is not considered as a national by any state under the operation of its law. In simple terms, this means that the stateless person does not have a nationality of any country. Stateless can be caused by a number of factors such as discrimination in nationality laws, conflicts between the gaps in nationality law between the countries. One of the factors, causes of stateless situation is uh, registration and documentation of people. Being undocumented is not the same as being stateless, but however, lack of birth registration can be put people at the risk of stateless as birth certificate needed to establish a nationality. Today we for example, Nikita's story, it's a vivid example of when documentation and birth registration is closely cooperated with the issues of citizenship of parents also. So in this area, our network, since the foundation, we have been working with the focus on topics of legal identity, because the issues of statelessness and legal identity are closely related, especially when it comes to de facto stateless people. When we are talking about the stateless people, some states officially recognized them as a with the status and documented them with the certificates and travel documents. But most of the stateless people around the world, in our region also, it's not an exception, still have a status stateless people, but unrecognized on this situation of de facto. De facto means that they have no recognizing by the paper, by the documents, their citizenship, and the most part of them, they have no any documents regarding their birth and civil status. In fact, the vast majority of these invisible to the state system people in a situation of actual statelessness also do not have a legal identity. Everyone has a right to be recognized as a person before the law. It's a Universal Declaration, Human Rights, Article 6. It's the core foundation of and one of the key principles of human rights system. So access to registration and identification is a key condition to enjoy rights and basic services, as well as a precondition to be a citizen. It's lays like a basis for the recognized for the people to grant a citizenship. For example, stateless children are often excluded from accessing education, for example, because of missing identity-related documentation required for school enrollment or examination eligibility. Our network is an active partner of UNHCR and UNICEF on Global Action Plan to End Statelessness, recognize the important contribution that universal birth registration would make to ensuring respect for the right to a nationality. Also, birth registration does not usually record nationality or legal status in the country. It is the most authoritative record of the information on the basis of which nationality and many other rights based on family connection may be claimed. In this direction for today, in particular, I would like to highlight the following progress in Central Asia. Can you show the previous, please? This is the progress which is I can share with you in our 5 countries of Central Asia. So from 2019, quite optimistic and significant progress in Central Asian states in meeting the goals of I Belong campaign and SDG 69, which related, as you mentioned before, legal identity for all, including birth registration by 2030. By securing the required political will and joint efforts of government, civil society, and international organizations, in particular UNHCR, more than 128,000 stateless people have acquired or confirmed a nationality since 2014 and were documented with the civil citizenship documentation. Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan amended their birth registration legislation to ensure the birth registration of all children on their territory and issue birth certificates to all. Kyrgyzstan did the same, but for now only fact of birth is registering, but birth certificates are issuing only upon the documentation of parents. So it's very important status of documentation when children registering their birth. So this kind of progress shows that states doing great progress on registration system. And in 2019, Tajikistan enacted the amnesty law for foreign nationals and stateless persons irregularly residing in a country, which provides an avenue for legalizing their stay, documentation, and naturalization, including their children who was born in a country. In 2020, Kazakhstan launched a countrywide stateless identification and documentation campaign jointly with UNHCR and its partners, includes our members in the network. As a result of joint campaign, by the end of September of this year, the Migration Service of Kazakhstan registered more than 6,000 persons of undetermined nationality without proper documentation, proper civil documentation. Out of them, close 5,000 have been documented. And regarding the Uzbekistan, in 2020, last year, Uzbekistan enacted a new citizenship law that provides for the recognition as citizens of Uzbekistan of stateless persons permanently residing in Uzbekistan. As mid of this year, close to 50,000 stateless people were already recognized and documented as citizens of Uzbekistan. So please, next slide. Please preview us, I think. And the importance of legal identity in a pandemic time, it's very important. As we know, they are all within all restrictions related to the pandemic time and lockdowns. The legal identity is becoming very priority issue, and Central Asian Network participates in the global Together We Can consortium and implements the research and advocacy initiative to raise the awareness of governments and other regional actors on the situation of stateless persons in context of COVID-19 pandemic by conducting basic research in Central Asian countries to determine the exclusion of stateless persons and as well as persons without legal identity in order to raise the protection issues in a pandemic time. And in this regard, Central Asian Network was a tender and co-organized with the UNHCR and UNICEF first regional conference on the rights to legal identity and prevention of statelessness, leaving no one behind at the birth in 2018. And next, today's main challenge of network is to get all states in region to accede to stateless convention and implement their provisions in national legislation, which is very important because these two conventions, UN conventions, will be like a guarantees, like improve the national legislations against the stateless and the lack of legal identity of the people. And this challenge required the consolidation of allies to achieve the adoption of legislative guarantees, so-called legal safeguards, to prevent stateless, ensuring the universal right to legal identity. Thank you. It's shortly for now from my side. If you have some questions, please, I remain open.
Azizbek, thank you so much. Incredibly pertinent, important points that you've raised there. In particular, this issue of COVID-19, etc. And indeed, I notice somebody making a comment as well about in many countries, an ID card, some form of legal identity is necessary to receive a vaccine. And as we are all aware, the pandemic, the virus does not care about your nationality. The virus does not care about your identity. The virus cares about the body that it wants to invade. So governments really should be issuing vaccines from a public health perspective, using public health criteria and not bothering with citizenship law, nationality law, civil registration law on that matter. Please vaccine everybody on your territory. Secondly, with regards to the UN's approach on statelessness and civil registration, I cannot speak on behalf of our colleagues from UNHCR, but I am aware that they do believe and agree, and the rest of the UN supports them on this, that UN member states should register everybody that is not registered on their territory. And the question of citizenship or nationality does not have to have anything to do with that fact. So we would implore countries, for any children that are born, stateless children that are born on the territory, please issue the birth certificate, register the birth, issue the birth certificate. It does not have to mention or say anything about citizenship or nationality. For other stateless people that are living in a country that perhaps they have lived in their entire life, member state governments, we would implore you, please register these people in national population registers, national identity registers, issue them with legal identity. Again, it does not have to say anything about citizenship or nationality, which can be another issue tackled through other channels in other laws at other stages. So thank you, Azizbek, on that one. Colleagues, I am not seeing any questions per se in the chat box at the moment, but I want to give the opportunity now for any colleagues that may want to come in and ask a question to please do so. Or indeed, if you have any question, to please write it in the chat box, and then we can see should it be addressed to Azizbek, to Nikita, or indeed a general question. Again, I'm not seeing any at the moment. So really, given that we're 5 minutes again away from our allotted time, I just want to see whether Nikita wants to come back in and comment at all on some of the experiences that Azizbek has mentioned in his presentation, or if there's anything additional to add. Okay. No problem. Colleagues, with that in mind then, given that we are almost at the end, I think we can wrap up with a couple of closing comments from my side. It is 2021. The commitment of the international community, the commitment of all UN member states, is that everybody on the planet should have legal identity by the year 2030. Although there have not been any intermediate targets set along the way, the UN itself had committed to trying to assist up to 300 million receive legal identity by 2025. This is a clock that is very much ticking, and we would encourage and implore all member states to continue putting the resources, financial, legal, institutional resources, towards the legal identity system in your country. If birth registration, death registration is under-resourced traditionally, please put the money towards it. Please make legal changes necessary. Please put the staff and the IT systems in place necessary to ensure every birth is registered, every death is registered. If countries are expanding or rolling out the national population registers, national identity registers, national ID card schemes, or increasingly fully digital versions of ID schemes, which can do an enormous amount to improve people's financial inclusion, improve access to public and private services. Please, at the same time, also make sure to resource the core births and deaths civil register, and indeed the register that is registering other major life events such as divorces, marriages, judicial separations, etc. Aziz Bek, I know your hand was raised earlier. I don't know if you wanted to come back in and make another point.
Thank you, Mr. McKean. Just a short comment, echoing your comment related to COVID-19 and legal identity issues. And you're absolutely right that governments, I think, recommend governments to think about the main principles of pandemic safety. It's all now recognized that if everyone safe, the civil society will save, right? So in this situation, it's very important to access to vaccination and other measures of protection to all, even they have a paper or no paper, because I fully agree with you, the pandemic not aware about the paper of people, right? So next comment, it's about the bureaucracy system, because unfortunately, this modern time, civil documentation is a key for all sphere of people, right? From the security, travel, education, banking, work, everything. And sometimes this bureaucracy very complicated and developed that the main mission of this bureaucracy untouched the main goals of this bureaucracy. Sometimes states unfortunately forgot for whom were made this bureaucracy. For the benefit of people, we are doing some clarification documents for easy for their lives, right? So that's why I call the states and decision makers to go back to the basics of why we are preparing all this kind of bureaucracy. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Aziz Bek. Thank you, Nikita, also for your comment. Now that you've written in the chat box, you've now received your citizen certificate through your mother's name as well, which was again acquired after the Supreme Court judgment. Nikita, congratulations. Thank you just for, again, what you've done for yourself, but also for many, many other people now that have benefited from your incredible determination. Colleagues, as you can see in the chat box also, the formal session of the conference will start again shortly and can be accessed via the YouTube links that are appearing in the chat box on the right. The last point I would like to say with regards to recognizing documents. and divorcing this issue from the citizenship nationality issue. There are many, many people now in the last number of years that have been born into incredibly difficult conflict situations in parts of the world and born under the authority of political entities that are not recognized or who no longer exist. Once again, we would call upon member states, look, one does not have to recognize a particular political entity to recognize the fact that a child was born into circumstances that the child did not choose. Please recognize the documents that attest to a child's birth at a place and a date that the child's birth occurred. Again, complex questions around nationality and citizenship can be decided upon in different fora at a different time, but no child should suffer from having been born into a warlike situation from political entities that are not recognized, are not member states of the UN or recognized by any other countries. Colleagues, I believe that this is the end of our session. We've gone just a couple of minutes over. Thank you once again to everybody that has joined. I believe we've had close to 80 people in the session. Congratulations. Thank you once more to Nikita and to Azizbek. There's a comment there from my colleague Nasikarn that there is the ministerial roundtable discussion tomorrow. There is the link on YouTube. The topic will be on the pandemic, people and preparedness, ministerial roundtable and civil registration of vital statistics, COVID-19 and health. Dear colleagues, we will say goodbye. Thank you for joining us today. Good luck for everything in the future. See you at the next ministerial conference and the next warm-up session. Goodbye.